Welcome back to the Hill of Roses, where we come once again to celebrate the best contributors to our united progressive movement. On today's episode of The Daily Priority, we are talking to Adam Smith. You might remember him from our previous episode where we had a candidate supporter debate. He was representing Tulsi Gabbard when we also had on guests supporting Pete Buttigieg as well as Andrew Yang. Today I'm here to be able to talk with Adam about his top three priorities. Welcome, Adam, back to the show. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you so much for having me on again. I enjoyed the Democratic debate so much. I learned a lot from the other two people I was talking with, and I'm excited to come back on to talk about my top three policies.
Yeah, that was a really fun time being able to talk with Tom and Jason as well during that debate. And so when Adam had signed up, he had told me that his top three priorities were mental health, foreign policy, and social justice slash unity. Adam, I know from the last time you had mentioned you worked in mental health, you are a mental health professional. Why do you believe that mental health is such a top priority that we need to be focusing on in our politics?
I think that mental health is my top priority because mental health is embedded in so many of their policies. When it comes to mental health and social justice, it's talking about the discrepancies and all these things that we don't know about each other or how different people live their lives. And I think that can leak over when we assume we know how to fix the problem. And the different communities are like, wait a minute, you haven't even stepped a mile in my shoes or considered what my thought process is. So how can you fix my problems? It leans over into healthcare because mental health is a part of the healthcare field, one of the least funded portions of it, or at least considered. It leaks over to gun control as well because, as a lot of people know from the news, mental health and gun control are thankfully brought up commonly together because, as I like to say, some people are, we need to talk about the guns. Some people are like, we need to talk about mental health. And I'm just like, why don't we talk about both?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I actually had a very similar conversation with Marcus Kassler in my past episode about how we have been having this conversation all wrong of it being one or the other. We do need to have both when we're talking about mental health in the aspect of gun control. My question for you is I've heard some people, when they talk about mental health being a political priority, that they treat it kind of like a symptom, that you don't have to tackle mental health directly, you kind of have to tackle the underlying causes which are causing a mental health crisis. So some people will point to poverty being one of the things to solve rather than trying to directly aim at mental health. Do you think it's more of a symptom, or do you think it's something we need to tackle more directly?
I think it's sort of a bit of both, but I'll cover what you're talking about first because that's a really valid point. That's how we work in mental health. We don't just come in and we're like, let's fix your disorder or let's fix the problem. We kind of, at least the approach that I take is kind of like, how did you get to that problem? What are the problems you're having? Because obviously people don't. Well, there's genetics and there's chemicals, but a lot of mental disorders don't develop right out of the blue, right out of the gate. There's a problem lying underneath it. As we like to say, that people are wounded rather than evil. So we have to help fix those wounds and address those problems, especially when it comes to the substance use field, which is an area that I seek to get further certification in because a lot of people are like, oh, people look at them, they're irresponsible, they chose this, and we say that's not exactly true. People, when they take substances out of the blue, there's a problem underneath. There's a pain that people are suffering under, and they're taking it because they want a relief to that pain. So when people come in for substance use, yeah, like you said, it's a symptom. We don't tackle the substance use right away. We don't come out of the gate to our client and say, well, we need to work on getting you off this substance. We like to ask, what hurt you? Like, well, not directly what hurt you, but we ask like, what led you to drink? What led you to take that pill? What led you to take that first cigarette? We have to address the problems that led to it before we even get close to reducing the substance use. And I think that can go for even beyond people with mental health disorders. People, I like to bring up whenever people say someone in the KKK or someone in white supremacy, someone in Antifa, any other radicalized group, especially the KKK, because I've worked with a couple of people in white supremacy, and a lot of people want to dismiss them right away. And I like to ask them, like, what led you to join? And sometimes they'll come up with, it's usually a circumstance where they met a person in a minority community, Jewish, black, that hurt them, just one person that caused them trauma. And we have to work through that pain, just let them talk it out. And then you start to kind of ask questions like, do you consider that person to represent the community? And slowly, when that gets less and less considered and the pain starts diminishing, then suddenly that big group isn't the only person showing them kindness and saying, we'll protect you, we care about you. And that's how a couple of them ended up quitting those groups.
Yeah, no, I really hear your point there. I think we do write off people way too quickly when they are really being triggered by a personalization of politics. They kind of see that these one or individual actors who may have harmed them, as you said, and they take it as the indicative of the whole movement. I know that we have seen that even in within our like progressive like movement. There has been a lot of you point to individual bad actors who have been making comments about maybe your candidate and you paint that as the whole group. I think way too often we do make that generalization across the board. One of the things I'd be curious to know is, do you think like mental health is something that has been growing as a problem, or is it simply more that we're becoming aware of it? Because I think some people will say, yes, it's growing as a problem because of some of our technological growths and social media hurting our mental health or the economy potentially. Or is it simply that we're now more aware of it because we can see it through our social media platforms and have that transparency?
Well, well, in the mental health community, as people who have been aware of it for a longer period than say the general public, it has been slightly on the rise. It's not like going up by 10% all the time. Like conduct disorder, which leads to sociopathy, it has been on the rise. Anxiety and depression always on the rise. Suicide definitely on the rise.
Mm.
So I'd say that the overall increase of mental health problems isn't as dramatic, but awareness is. So it can make it sound more. It can make it more dramatic. So I would say to both, yes, there is a rise, but awareness is going up as too, and that's good. But
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think it's kind of maybe wrong of me to frame it as an either or. There's definitely diseases of despair that have been on the rise as we've seen in our life expectancy going down the past 3 years. And I think we can see, as you pointed out, that this is, yes, in part due to social media's amplification, but it is just we're more aware of it now. We see it more often. So I think that is a good point to be had. I'd be curious to know, what do you think is this underlying cause of why we're not making as much progress as we need to be in our government to be able to address this problem? And what do you think the people at home should be doing to try and advocate for mental health as a political issue?
um, I wish I could know exactly what's going on in these politicians' heads, but the fact being that I don't, I haven't, I want to give credit to Andrew Yang for bringing up mental health the most, and really, I'd say bringing it to the forefront compared to other politicians I know. I've emailed and called Tulsi Gabbard numerous times, going like, if you make mental health part of your big platform, you're gonna shoot up because it's not really talked about a lot. There's like there's one side going, there's not, there's there's a lot of different reasons and speculations to why, the most common being from us in the mental health industry being like, well, if they actually started listening and fixing these things, it would fix problems, and then they wouldn't have problems to fix, and they wouldn't be making as much money off medicine because, as I've heard from a lot of people that have mental disorders, they don't really like the medicine. They don't really like medicine. It to a it is a need it needs to an end, especially with things like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or ADHD that sort of require the medicine to reduce the symptoms a little bit. But a lot of people have been speaking up and talking about how talk therapy and psychotherapy, just speaking to a therapist, can be enough. And it's sort of kind of a real simple solution. We're wondering why the politicians aren't talking about it more or inflating it more, because it would solve a lot of problems. But I think that there's a lot of other companies lobbying against. There's a lot of companies, pharmaceutical companies especially, lobbying against talk therapy and psychotherapy because it would reduce the medication. And medication can be a big issue. I mean, one of the big hot button issues of Columbine was that they that and a lot of school shootings, they run psychiatric medicine that the side effects could have resulted in the shootings. So a lot of us in the industry are going like, why aren't you addressing this? Why aren't you addressing this? And we're just kind of mostly getting silence when we go to lobby or we go to Capitol Hill. I don't, so I can't, so long story short, there could be a lot of conjecture. There could be a lot of nefarious reasons they're doing it, but ultimately they don't really give us an answer when we ask.
Mm. Yeah, no, I totally hear you. And I think the incentives are one of the biggest factors. As you kind of pointed out, the political incentivization, I think it even extends to our media as well. They're incentivized to kind of highlight drama, and kind of they've not done a responsible job when it comes to handling mass shooters too. Oftentimes publishing the details of these mass shooters that can create copycat cases for future people that might be mentally unwell. But with that being said, I want to kind of transition into your second top priority, which is foreign policy. So I know
Yeah.
you had mentioned that you are a Tulsi supporter. You defended her last time at her debate. Why do you believe foreign policy is a subject that we all need to be taking care of? Because I know, first and foremost, there's a lot of people who say, why should I be caring what's happening in the world when we're struggling here at home?
Well, unfortunately, the safety of the entire world does not rest solely in our hands, but in the hands of other countries that we do have to coordinate with. And yes, to everyone who is probably going to groan at this answer, that includes Russia, China, and other countries. If the United States, for example, in green energy, if we cut our emissions by 100%, the statistics go from anywhere between like 7% to 33%. That's how much we would reverse climate change. That's not enough. And other issues like trade or coordinating brokering peace talks, like say Ukraine. Right now it's France and Germany versus Russia. Basically, France and Germany are the one brokering the peace talks with Ukraine. That doesn't give Ukraine a lot of bargaining room. So I've talked to a lot of people that oppose Tulsi Gabbard's foreign policy, and they're like, "Oh, like wow, well, you're for Russia. You want to stop Russia?" And I'm like, "Okay, no, it's for diplomacy. For example, let's say, like in my opinion, U.S. should enter the peace talks on the side of Ukraine. We've been suspiciously avoiding getting involved there in the peace talks. And sending diplomats or the president to go talk isn't engaging a lot of U.S. troops and putting them in harm's way. It's not giving a lot of money. It's simply our ambassadors doing their jobs that they've signed up for to go and be a part and give Ukraine more power at the table. Because right now, Zelensky is holding his own pretty well for the fact that he's not playing with a good set of cards at the negotiating table. But with the U.S. on their side, it wouldn't be a huge slight to Russia, and it would also protect Ukraine. But I bring that up to people, and they're like, "Well, I don't think the peace talks will work." And they're like, "No, keeping U.S. troops in the some people actually said, let's keep U.S. troops in countries and convince them Russia is the common enemy, because their option for diplomacy with Russia is we need to convince them we can kill them at any time." I'm just like, is that a way to talk to a country? Um, People can call me a Russian or an Assad asset for this, but I know people on the ground in Syria, Aleppo, Damascus, and a lot of Russians. I went on a podcast with Russians before, and I asked them a question. I'm like, so what's your opinion about everything going on in America right now, and talking about Russia? And they're like, you think we have power when we are dying in mass in their own country. They work 8-hour days on starving wages. they still have first Cold War era military technology, and as they said, their mental health industry is their doctors sometimes literally saying, "Drink a bottle of vodka to get rid of your problems."
Okay.
That doesn't sound like a country that can really oppose. And also, the U.S. doesn't give Europe enough credit for its power, despite the fact the European Union is going through right now. U.S. sanctions, according to the Russians I spoke to, did nothing except incentivize Russia to become more independent in their industry. But European sanctions hurt them because Russia depends on natural gas trade and a lot more trade with Europe. So basically, if we think people think that the U.S. needs to be there to stop this Russian aggression, Europe is doing a better job than we give them credit for. And to touch upon the Middle East, because can't talk about foreign policy without mentioning that region. We need to consider how the Middle East got into this issue how the Middle East, as we know it, began after World War One, when the Ottomans were kicked out, and a lot of different groups helped the British and the French liberate the region, and they're like, okay, you're gonna help us rebuild and let us be autonomous, right? And no, the British and the French divided them up into states, sometimes putting groups that hated each other in the same state, like in the case of like Saudi Arabia and Iran as we know it. So the Middle East got as it was because the U.S. was trying to carve out regions and force certain ones to play nice. Let's not do it again, especially considering the other thing. These wars are not what people will seem. WMD in Iraq, I won't claim that's true or false with the evidence given, but with Syria, with I think 51 whistleblowers now in OPCW, I don't know how exactly to pronounce it, came out saying it's not that we can't prove Assad did it. So even I can't claim Assad wasn't responsible for the gas attacks. But as a researcher, I take a lot of stock in them claiming we don't have evidence either way. Mm-hmm. And that they were forced to say Assad did it because of outside pressure from higher ups. We need to get a result so we can actually either look good or get the result that people wanted to engage in those attacks. And I don't believe in engaging in a war with faulty evidence. Mike Pompeo or Donald Trump can say there is an imminent attack. We don't know where or when, so therefore we have to respond all they want. That's stupid. And the fact that we've spent $4 billion a month in the war in Afghanistan, which if you've read the Afghanistan papers, it's unwinnable, and they know it. Mm. Now, I want to say, as a person with these policies, the most common rebuttal is you don't care about the Kurds, you don't care about genocide, you don't care about the people in the region. And that's sad, because the person going into the mental health industry, I can't be a good therapist without caring about anyone, no matter what. The fact being that things aren't black and white there, and U.S. troops aren't really able to help. The one argument that U.S. troops are keeping the Kurds from being slaughtered is the most common argument. Now, if that was true, I might be a little bit for it, but Syria, Assad himself offered at the start a place for the Kurds to live, which I believe was kind of what the Kurds wanted in the first place. And he's offering them Turkey. That's insulting. Turkey should be thrown out of NATO for that. So the Kurds do not have as few options as people say. And I do hope that protection for them happens for their sake, or I would say, since we created this mess, we should allow them to come to the United States in response. But yeah, my foreign policy is that it's not a direct anti-imperialism or isolationist stance, but there's a lot of things to consider, and rather than make an intense movement either way, I think people should consider the options more before they make a call. And in the end, that's what I say before engaging in any acts of war or aggression toward another country. Make sure that there is a imminent threat to the United States or its allies. Otherwise, please, as someone who's seen a lot of suffering from a lot of veterans, if you care about supporting the troops or the veterans, as a lot of pro-war people try to gaslight people into, don't create more veterans and don't create more suffering for them or their families.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think sometimes we discount that the best investment for veteran health is simply less war. Like using that money that we would be using on war to be able to invest in our veterans would be a very beneficial outcome because it is one of our main homeless populations within the United States and one of our main groups that are suffering from mental health problems, as we had mentioned before. But I think there was two very interesting kind of themes that you touched on there when you were describing foreign policy. The first is that kind of foreign policy still is domestic policy. When you kind of brought up climate change, when you kind of brought up trade, that we can't kind of separate ourselves truly from the world and just solve our own problems. Everything's still going to be going on. We still need to trade with partners to get goods that we need, and that our environment's going to become unsuitable at home if we don't work with the rest of the world to curb their emissions as well. And then secondly, kind of this dynamic of unilateral versus multilateral like movements, and also kind of slowing down and letting Congress do its job of declaring war, because we're going so hastily into conflicts because it's just coming from the executive branch rather than considering all the information at play. I think those are all very important points. I'd be curious to know what you think our relationship should be between using a unilateral strategy as the United States trying to impose its will, having the largest military ourselves, versus kind of working within the UN channels as peacekeeper missions.
Oh yeah, oh yes. One of the very common people I run into, the concept that we must establish ourselves as the most powerful country in the world, and a big military can do that. You, like that's fine having the biggest military in the world and the most power, but then you can't waste it. And we can also have that power within the UN or other countries coordinating, because if you want to be more powerful than Russia per se, don't just throw soldiers at its allies trying to curb their influence. I think that the U.S. it's a strategy, I would say, to try and convince Russian allies to not be allies with Russia, or trying to oust dictators or leaders like Assad that lean towards Russia. But it's going a little far when the moment a country seems to lean toward Russia, we're sending troops there, especially because we can be more powerful than Russia without doing that. As I said before, from people I've spoke to in Russia, Russia is struggling. So we're already there. We're already outstripping them by a lot. Like if someone worry about China with their military and economic power. But to answer your question, I would say personally, I approve the multilateral approach, because regardless if you're the most powerful country or not, if you're work the diplomatics right, like say a lot of countries who never go to war, Switzerland, for example, sitting there in the middle, if you work the other angles enough to where you just make it unappetizing to go to war with you, no matter how strong your military or the rest is, you're going to be fine. And I think the U.S. should kind of step toward that approach rather than trying to grow right now, because it's already number one and no one is really close. It should right now try to maintain. I wouldn't say completely cut back yet, but it should be working. The U.S. should try to work with what it's got right now, and like okay, to put it into like an example, will be like, okay, military, we're fine right now. We need to look at what we're not good at right now, and what's not good right now is the economy and the social situation, and most definitely diplomacy. So I would say lean toward the multilateral, and And I would say if that doesn't work out and other countries start posing a big threat to us, then rebalance. There's always the room to rebalance. It's not like if we cut everything right now, we're gonna lose everything in 1 year and become like number five. The U.S. has the U.S. is not going to be a small power anytime soon. Because if we keep trying to push number one the way we are right now, we're using the same strategy as the Soviet Union, and we know what happened to them.
Oh yeah, and I think there's a lot of room to be cut. You could cut 25% of the military budget and still be greater than the next five countries combined in terms of its sizing. And I think one of the things that's kind of interesting in what you had mentioned is just if we want to be number one, you got to use the influence correctly. Like, if we're a leader, you have to show what good behavior is yourself. So, if you're constantly interfering
Mm-hmm.
in other countries, you're incentivizing other countries to say, well, that's what I got to do if I want to gain power and be like the United States. So, it's kind
Russia.
of like, yeah, exactly, with Russia. So, I totally agree with you that it's not bad that America has power and influence, and it's done good things in foreign policy over time too. I'm not going to deny that. But I do say that we have to focus more on being level headed in our leadership and try and set the example that we want for the world. Not an American first, but kind of, to cliche for an Andrew Yang campaign, a humanity first type of approach. And I think that would go a long way. One of the things I'd be curious on to wrap up foreign policy is what do you think we can be really doing to influence this? It's one of those things where the foreign policy establishment has kind of been both locked into the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. We have a very large military industrial complex. What do you think can actually be done as individual citizens to be able to advocate for a better foreign policy as a country?
Um, Other than vote all those rats out of Congress and our government that are doing that, I think to be able to talk with a more educated mindset because people listen to those with experience. Um, if you see a Russian person online, don't well, and anyone, any nationality really, don't discredit them. Like even if they're our rival, they're like humanity first. They're humans. So I think as what we can do to become a more credible voice is get the experiences from as many people in other countries as possible. Like learn what's going on, pay attention to all sides of their media, their left media, their right media, their independent YouTubers, get voices from them because I think the greatest weapon we have is government says, well, this is going on like this is going on right now in Syria, or this is going on, or this is what Russia's doing, and we can be like, oh, really? Well, I see what I have here from people in the country is this, and if more people have those accounts, like if every person knew a Russian, or every person knew a Syrian, or every person knew a French or British with Brexit, French with the Yellow Vest, Syria with Syria, Russia with learning how dangerous they really are, we can have as many voices as possible going, you're lying. And the more we're able to catch them in their lies, the further their argument diminishes. And if more people see them lying, more people join in, more people with the votes, and more people to kick their ass out.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's education, it's humanizing it, and then it's getting engaged with the political process to get the people that are propagating this out of there. With that being said, I want to move now to your third and final priority, which was social justice and unity. Do you mind describing a little bit what you meant by that and why that became such an important topic for you?
Um, I put social justice with unity there because I think it's such an important topic because it touches into one of the key lessons we learned before going into mental health as a therapist is you need to know what you don't know. And ultimately what we can never know is another person more than themselves.
Mm.
Yes, that's true. When you're going into a therapist, it could be intimidating to think this person knows a lot. They're going to pretend they know a lot. They're the doctor, they're a professional. But ultimately, it's the same approach we have to have toward other people is we don't know. Like we should be less assume, more ask questions. And I think this fits really well in the social justice movement because I grew up in a socially conservative, upper class, white, really affluent neighborhood, and I was always raised to be like, don't go to the black communities, you'll get shot. Crimes, they're gonna get you. They're gonna see you're white, or they're gonna see you have a nice car. And I fell for it for a while. I fell for it thinking I knew everything about the black communities or other religions, like other religions are going to go to hell. But until you start going to those communities and asking people those questions, there, there's a lot of people think they can go to social justice without getting the voices of the communities they want to help, and that's ultimately not the answer. And that's kind of the same thing with unity. It's why I opened the People's Coalition Discord server, because I was like, I want to hear from the Bernie people, I want to hear from the Yang people, I want to hear from the Marianne, other voices. Ultimately, what we have to learn, number one, the biggest myth of all is not knowing something is bad. Like, you're stupid if you don't know it. You have to put on this air of knowing everything, that you're strong, this illusion. Well, the more you build up that illusion, the more it's going to hurt when it kicks you in the butt that you don't know. So for starters, don't have any shame in not knowing everything. And once you're able, it's a Socrates quote. I love it. The biggest thing I know is I don't know anything. And then from once you have that mindset, at least for me, it's almost like I naturally became a nicer and more respectful person because rather than assume, I asked. I started working as a therapist in communities, some suburbs of Chicago that are pretty dangerous, that by media standards, and we know how reliable they can be, are dangerous and bad and crime ridden and full of criminals and drug users. And they're so welcoming. And like they were shocked, and yes, they were suspicious, and rightfully so first, because I'm coming from a place that they don't know. But started just listening and saying like, hey, I'm here to help you, and ultimately I can't help you if I don't know you, and that's going to be up to you to say, not me to assume. And it's amazing how much progress was made and how much my world was expanded. And I barely talk 10% of the time. It's just like, hey, I want to help you with your problems, but I have no conception of what your problems are. Can you tell me? Just like I think it would help us to touch upon unity now in the political campaigns, to not pretend we know what the Yang gang knows or what the Bernie gang knows, or even other candidates that I don't follow as much, like Pete or Biden. Just be like, hey, what's your policies? What's your platform? Why do you think that they're an ideal choice for president? And I think if we have that attitude toward all people, just ask questions more, I think we'd have a more unified country.
Yeah, I strongly agree with your point there. I think there was a couple of very interesting notes that you had made there. I think the first one is just the asking of questions. I do agree with you that too often we come in with our preconceived judgments of what people are or what people are thinking. And I think that does us a lot of hindrance to make those assumptions when we instead could just validate them instead. Like, it's not bad to have assumptions. Everyone has them. That's part of what makes humans the way we are. But the way you actually validate an assumption is you say, does it apply here? And is it real? And I think the second part that you made really interestingly clear is that you have to talk to these people where they are and at the level that they're at too. Because frankly, if you kind of come in with your own preconceived notion of how the world works, you kind of have to have that humility that you can be wrong and that you can accept other people's opinions of what they need to help themselves, because they're not going to know what they need for themselves better than themselves. So I think
it's okay to be wrong.
It's okay to be wrong. And I think the last one is to kind of respect like There's like an individualism to it. Like you can't one size fits all it. And I kind of wanted to touch on that a little bit more and hear what you think is how do we, when we're kind of working through our politics, there's going to be a lot of disagreement when we want to try and create these social causes of a program that might seem to most people as one size fits all. How do we still incorporate those individualism factors so that it actually works for each use case?
Um, for that, it's gonna be a tough answer for some people. We do the best we can on the
Mm.
government level. We cover all we can, but ultimately our job does not end after election day. We will have we as individuals in the groups will have to work to fill in the cracks for that even the best policy has. We'll work to get the best policy we can in office, like UBI, and then the rest for the people that are still struggling or need help or weren't helped as much by it. It's up to us as humanity. Like the that's what we do. Like we work with what we're given. We get it. We it's best to get as educated as you can before election day, get the best idea of what's going on, get the most perspectives. You take what you know, and then you vote for what you believe is best, and hopefully you also vote with what you believe is best for other people based on as many accounts of other people as you can get. But then, like you said, one size fits all, that simply just doesn't happen. And that's where our job comes in. That's why I'm so thankful in looking at other campaigns and their supporters, notably in Bernie and Yang's group, and they're like, our job does not end on election day. The policies aren't going to help everybody, but then it's up to us to help from there and be be like the second wing of that policy.
Mm. Yeah, no, I hear you there. I think one of the things that it's kind of hard, especially within this populist movement, when we feel like the enemy, like we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot pursuing perfection sometimes when we're not accepting that we're never going to have truly perfect. All we can do is consistently improve, and that we
Yes.
have to have trust in one another that we are still working towards that common goal of consistently improving. And yes, I will strongly agree we do need bold changes. We're not just going to settle for just pure incrementalism, but we kind of have to have that trust that the work doesn't stop with just getting one person elected. The trust doesn't stop there because we need to work together to overhaul Congress as a unified faction. We have to know that they're going to still get pushback and we're going to have to pressure Congress, like in terms of the Republican side, too, to get things through. And that even when we think we have the best solution in the world, that's an assumption. It's going to get test cased once we actually roll it out and implement it. So we're going to find flaws that arise once we actually get what we want in place. And we have to
Mm-hmm.
work on improving that too. With that being said, before we wrap up, I wanted to let you talk a little bit more about the People's Coalition and what kind of inspired you to start that and what you hope to be able to do with it going forward.
So I put a little bit of actual research into this, but it's mostly my observations on Twitter. Uh, Twitter can be hell world sometimes.
That's an understatement.
Not even when you're getting into arguments, but trying to find educated discussion on Twitter can be extremely difficult. And basically what People's Coalition came from was what we tried to do was set up a Twitter chat with a bunch of people that like to talk policy. And ultimately, and even then, there's way too many policies to try and fit into a Twitter to find foreign policy if people were talking for 2 hours on others. So I was like, okay, I run Discord servers. I moderate quite a few. I own a couple too. And I was like, I'm going to create a Discord server because then I can have like 20 policy channels. And even then, I think I still have to add some. Um, and also I wanted to find a place because as someone who likes to be unbiased as possible, but also has an eye for when people are being disrespectful, I also wanted to implement suggestion channels for people to critique their or other candidates so I included that as well. So I created the server to create a more organized front of, at least for now, Marianne. Yes, I don't care if she's not still in the race. Her policies are great, and those should be kept alive. Yang, Tulsi, and Bernie supporters to come together, and with the moderators we have, Alethea.
Hmm.
She's one of my moderators, and the Black Progressive from the Bernie wing, and Kennedy, who is from the Marianne official Discord, and then myself for the Tulsi faction, and two other moderators from Bernie and Yang. I noticed that those five had a good eye for getting rid of toxicity and classic Twitter threads themselves, so I made them my mods. So the People's Coalition is a community to not only talk serious about policy in an organized manner and get a lot of sources. We use a lot of links pinned to get educated on policies, be able to constructively criticize candidates, and not only that, just find a community of people like you to do other activities with. I'd love to expand it more when I have the time. So ultimately, I did made it to do all that, but also because so many people were disgruntled with Twitter and they wanted to quit Twitter because it is the most toxic social media in my opinion. So I wanted to create a place for people to get their discussion and all the things they go on Twitter for without all that bullying and doxing and toxicity and disrespectful and derailing. Because I think on Twitter, people want to respond, they want to get you, and it's very aggressive. We're on Discord, especially when under my team of moderators, you can kind of trust that we're going to be gearing it toward evidence-based discussion and being respectful, because if people argue in bad faith repeatedly or personally attack users on my server, you will not be in the server very long.
Yes, no, I hear you on that front. I'm a member of this coalition as well, so the audience knows. One of the things I wanted to clarify with you is what led you to choose those candidates versus having potentially like the Warren supporters or the Steyer supporters of the world join it? And secondly, what do you hope that it can be doing going forward?
Yeah, that has been an ongoing discussion between our mod team, and we've had Biden people in, and we've had Warren people in, and they always leave within a week. So even though we're like, you know what, yeah, we'll accept people from other candidates, and I think going forward we'll probably do that. Like Warren and Steyer have come up a lot. I think that's fine. Um, I chose those four candidates because they seem to have the most similarities in policies, and also they seem to represent the more progressive wing. I know a lot of Warren people dispute that, and that's why I've allowed Warren people in kind of too. So I think that as it expands more, I think that I know we have a role for other candidates. So people watching that don't support Marianne, Tulsi, Yang, or Bernie, you can join. But yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for that question. Thanks for kickstarting that I have to kind of
Yeah,
get that conversation going with my mod team to be open up to other candidates, supporters.
yeah, because I wonder if it's like if it's a self-identification of progressive and being willing to be respectful, if there's like a specific like policy focus to it. I think there's a lot of potential, as you said, to get away from the Twitter and actually try and unite some of this division that we have within these individual factions. So I think there's a lot of potential there, and I've been happy to be a member of it. As we get ready to head out from this episode, can you let the folks out there know how they can join if they'd like to join? And then, secondly, if there's anything else that you'd like to plug, Adam.
Yeah. Other than my Twitter handle at PonyNet95, or you can just look up Aurora Rider on Twitter, as I did the other day, and found some people calling me a horrible therapist for what I was advocating. If you go to that Twitter handle, my pinned tweet has the Discord link. Like I just said, join. At this point, I would honestly say no matter what your candidate, as you believe that you can conduct yourself respectfully and try to keep. If you're going to be active in the policy channels, try to have as much evidence or sources as possible. or if you don't use sources, have a more question based mind. But yeah, go to at ponynet95 or just Google, Twitter, or a Rider. My server will be in the pinned tweet. Looking forward to talking. And my just opened up my DMs to everyone. So if you want to talk about mental health, especially because I love bringing up mental health as it's not talked about a lot in politics. And People's Coalition server and my Twitter. That's all I really have to plug.
Well, thank you so much, Adam, for being able to come on and talk with me again. And yes, everyone should go out there and join the People's Coalition. I think anyone who's watching this channel is probably understanding that we have to show common respect with one another. We have to highlight policy and be substantive when we're doing it. And I really think it is a great initiative to be having going forward. It actually relates to a lot of the initiatives that we have here on the channel that I want to plug before we end, which is first and foremost the open source policy. I think is a great way for us all to be able to contribute together. It's a way where we can say, we can edit together one platform. We're not going to always agree. We're going to have to workshop through it. But I think the collective mind is usually better than any individual politician can create. And so I'm very proud of how that's developed. It went from 8 pages when I started it from my own personal policy platform to 22 pages now, which is a really big improvement in terms of at least scope. The second thing I want to make mention of is you can join just like Adam did here on the channel and sign up for an episode as well. You'll be finding this stuff in the description section below. And finally, you're going to be finding our cheat sheet, which contains all of our channel's resources from surveys and polls to the signups to the policy platforms and beyond. With that being said, Rosebuds, I want you to be able to comment down below of what you thought of today's episode. Let me know who else you'd like to see come on next. And until next time, stay rosy.